Cardano has a ravenous and I think very healthy appetite for decentralization, but our well warranted focus on preserving that decentralization may have led many to underappreciate a powerful arrow in Cardano's quiver that could turn out to be one of our most potent DeFi tools of all. Ready? Let's go. We're going to talk about initial stake pool offerings and just how pervasive and transformative they may be in capital formation going forward. We're also going to talk about why they concern people so much for decentralization and also the significant regulatory hurdles that may be ahead for initial stake pool offerings. You may remember that when the idea of an initial stake pool offering first surfaced, many months ago, we talked about it on this channel because it was obvious there was a good chance this was probably going to be a big deal. Now that we've actually had initial stake pool offerings, it's probably good to take a moment and just appreciate the magnitude of the very first big initial stake pool offering that was held on Cardano. It was so big, even Cointelegraph had to take notice. So they ran this article recently, and in the article, they cite Meld as having attracted $1 billion in stake from 40,000 participants. I'm guessing that's wallets. I don't think they really have a way to measure uh, how many people were involved because people might have had multiple wallets staking to the Meld pools. But we're talking about $1 billion that was staked. If you think about the amount of money that was invested in ICOs in crazy years like 2017, which Cointelegraph is showing us right here, even in 2017, we're only talking about $2.5 billion. In 2016, only $500 million, and a fraction of that in 2014 and 2015. This seemed like a phenomenal amount of money in 2017 when I watched that whole ICO craze go down. And I know you're thinking to yourself, yeah, but that's money that people actually put at risk in those ICOs. They actually traded that amount of money for the eventually largely worthless tokens they got. Not all of them, but a lot of them turned out to be pretty worthless. In the case of Meld, the 1 billion is not an actual amount of money that was invested. In fact, it turned out that uh, Meld maybe only made like 10 million, according to this article. To me, this just points to the psychological power of the model of an initial stake pool offering. There's no way in my mind that Meld could have raised $1 billion during the same time period, but they were able to mobilize $1 billion. I don't think they could have convinced people to trade them $1 billion for a bunch of Meld tokens. I can't see that having happened during that time period, but they were able to get people to delegate $1 billion worth of ADA. That's significant. The ICOs in 2017, according to this graph, were only able to mobilize $2.5 billion. All of the ICOs during the entire 2017 ICO craze, only $2.5 billion. Meld, a single project on Cardano that hadn't even launched yet, couldn't even really announce when they were going to launch because of waiting for the Cardano network to launch, the PAB on mainnet and figure out all the answers to concurrency, all these things that were going on during this time period. Meld was able to mobilize $1 billion. This makes perfect sense to me because when I think about the power of the initial stake pool offering model, it's that the people delegating don't have to risk their capital. This is what we talked about when this model first surfaced. It's very psychologically powerful. People are willing to trade money they haven't earned yet in a way, I think, that they would not be willing to trade money they actually have in hand. They're going to trade two birds in the bush much more quickly than they will one bird in hand. And I think the results of this Meld ISPO show that. It was so successful for Meld. I can't, and we've seen another example more recently, of course, the Sunday Swap ISPO, which hasn't even happened yet. But we've already seen how much money is moving towards pools that have been announced as being selected to participate in the Sunday Swap ISPO. The people over at 21 ADA Stake Pool posted this. over 1%, approximately 290 million ADA, could be more, of stake has moved to initial stake pool offering pools since the vote results. This is obviously in relation to the Sunday swap vote that determined what stake pools would participate in their initial stake pool offering. This is interesting. I mean, obviously, this post is made probably out of concern for the possible centralization effects of these kinds of initial stake pool offerings. But it shows again just how powerful this initial stake pool offering model is. 290 million ADA have been moved to the initial stake pool, the Sunday swap initial stake pool offering pools, just since the votes have been released. So people, you can't even earn those tokens yet in this offering, and people have already moved 1% of the total stake over to those pools. Certainly, I can't really make an argument that this isn't going to impact decentralization. It looks like it definitely is. The thing is, I think it might be inevitable. I think the psychological power of these offerings is so great. The fact that delegators don't have to put their principal ADA at risk, just the future ADA they would be earning by delegating at risk. I think that's so psychologically powerful. I think these initial stake pool offerings are just going to become more and more and more common and take up more and more of the stake. The psychological power is just too great. That is, unless regulatory obstacles get in the way, which is exactly why Charles made this whiteboard video yesterday talking about initial stake pool offerings and regulatory concerns. So he first cited an article from August 21st, 2018, where the SEC decided they could enforce against an airdrop. An airdrop, many of you already know, happens when you just happen to hold a token or a coin on a particular blockchain. Somebody starts a new project and they just sort of airdrop you their new token for free. So you're not paying anything at all for that token. You're not even delegating anywhere and allowing them to take your rewards. You're just sort of given that token for free. And in the article that Charles cites, the SEC decided even that was enough for them to step in and enforce against that project, which is interesting because we've talked about the Howey test many, many times on this channel. And, one of the prongs of the Howey test is that you pay something of value in exchange for, this interest in this, joint enterprise. That's one of the important prongs. So you have to ask yourself, how can this still be a violation of the Howey test if you're paying nothing? Here's that article that Charles pulled up. So it turns out that airdrop was a little bit more complicated than just a normal airdrop. It turns out that airdrop was related to a bounty program in exchange for online promotional and marketing services that targeted potential investors and directed them to the company's offering materials. And of course, the SEC did conclude that the tokens were securities, and the rationale was that, according to the SEC, the lack of monetary consideration for free shares does not mean there was not a sell or offer for sale for purposes of the federal securities laws. Rather, a gift of a security is a sell for securities law purposes when the donor receives some real benefit, even if it does not involve the exchange of money. So in this case, the benefit, of course, was, people acting on this bounty program. But I agree with Charles's assessment. If even that is enough of a benefit to the donor, in the words of this article, certainly getting the ADA rewards from staking, you can certainly imagine how the SEC would come to the same conclusion about initial stake pool offerings. And of course, this is exactly why we've seen some projects in Cardano talk about doing initial stake pool offerings where they actually don't take any of the rewards at all. They're just using them to distribute some of their tokens out to the public. Certainly, you could also just use it to distribute tokens, and that's a slightly different thing. But I think the capital formation tool, the capital formation version of an initial stake pool offering, is way too powerful. It's going to keep happening. We also still have the very bad language in the bipartisan infrastructure bill about broker reporting requirements. This language is so broad and overly inclusive that right now we're in a position where we have to worry that maybe it applies to full nodes on all blockchains, including Bitcoin. Parties that couldn't possibly have the KYC type information that would be required for reporting. That's how overly broad that bad language in the bipartisan infrastructure bill is. And granted, we do have some very good allies in both the Senate and the House of Representatives who are going to work really hard to fix that language before it goes into effect in 2023. But Charles mentions in the video, hey, it looks like what's being set up is sort of like one crypto standard for the US and one crypto standard for most of the rest of the world. In this scenario, it makes sense that an exchange like eToro would ring fence US customers with any kind of a blockchain that involves staking like Cardano. And in fact, of course, that's what we've just seen. eToro didn't actually delist Cardano. Apparently, they were just ring fencing US users. So they didn't even have to deal with the US regulations that might be applied to US eToro users who might be trying to stake Cardano. Of course, the next question is, but where does that leave us in Cardano? And this again displays to me one of the reasons why I love the Cardano ecosystem so much. In my quest to, let's say, my leaning to always bet on the jockey, not the horse, one of the reasons why I bet on Cardano was because they're always looking forward. They're always trying to future proof themselves. And here's what they're doing to deal with this potential bad regulatory situation. So they're going to write a SIP, a Cardano improvement proposal, for optional delegation payloads. Via these optional delegation payloads, you'll be able to encrypt your digital identity and send it as metadata in the delegation transaction. Only the stake pool operator will be able to decrypt your encrypted optional delegation payload. That decrypted digital identity could even then act as a passphrase for unblinding of KYC, know your customer information with a third party KYC provider. Then, of course, we could avoid the bloat involved with actually having all that KYC information, available on the blockchain or over the blockchain somehow. I'm with Charles on all this. This is a terrible circumstance. I know a lot of you are like, shaking your hats right in the air. Like, what about privacy? What about, the ideals of crypto? This isn't very cypherpunk. I agree. This is a terrible circumstance, but we've got to have a plan to deal with this if this is the way it's going to be in the US. There's going to have to be some way to ring fence US customers and exclude them from these types of initial stake pool offerings. I mean, if these types of initial stake pool offerings are going to be happening at all, and a lot of these stake pool operators are in the US or there are US people involved in this process, then if these laws are to stay the way they are and they're going to be interpreted by the regulators the way they are, might end up having to exclude US customers, ring fence US customers from these initial stake pool offerings. And of course, this doesn't just apply to Cardano. Charles points out that no current proof of stake blockchain could really comply with these types of requirements as written. You would need something like this as a US stake pool operator to prove you have the KYC information on all your regulators, on all your delegators, not regulators, on all your delegators for the regulators. You need that information so that you could prove that you don't have, say, US customers involved in these kinds of offerings. And I mean, I think you can see where this is going. Eventually, maybe US customers are allowed, but with a whole bunch of regulations as to who can be involved in these kinds of offerings. To me, one of the worst case scenarios is that only accredited investors can be involved in these kind of offerings. I think one of the reasons and I've said this many times on this channel, one of the reasons the 2017 ICO period was so successful, one of the reasons that ICOs seemed so amazing was that anybody could participate. Any person any person could participate in these ICOs. You didn't need to be an accredited investor. In fact, if the ICOs in 2017 had been limited to accredited investors, it would not have been a craze. It would have been something else. It would have been like a drip of investment because only the same people who've always been able to invest in early stage projects would have been investing in those early stage crypto projects. And in fact, the whole crypto scene would probably look extremely differently today if that had been the case. On my part, I'm so glad that Cardano's already thinking about this because guess what, guys? These same types of issues and many more are probably going to apply to almost every single type of DeFi project. If you think about it, delegation and staking is really a form of DeFi. Staking is kind of DeFi. We're doing financial stuff on a decentralized basis for sure. For all the rest of the types of DeFi projects, we already kind of know that many different genres of DeFi are directly in the crosshairs of regulators like Gary Gensler at the SEC. The best case scenario for those projects based in the US, and many of them in Cardano are, is that they don't get regulated out of existence, which I think might be the current preference of some of our regulators and senators, especially the Dragon. The best case scenario is probably they don't get regulated out of existence outright and replaced by traditional finance entities donning a crypto facade. The best case scenario is probably that they only have to do KYC like this. And that may end up meaning a variety of different things. There's a whole spectrum of things that could mean. It may mean that they have to completely ring fence US customers. It may mean that they have to do KYC on those customers so that only certain US customers could participate. And, right now we're just talking about the US, but this could be the EU too. I mean, we tend not to be that far apart. In some ways, we are far apart in terms of how we regulate things, but the EU is not the farthest in the world from US regulation. This could be the EU too, and a lot of other parts of the world. Certainly, we've seen even stricter regimes. China, for instance, just kicked all of crypto out. We don't know exactly where we're going to fall on the spectrum of regulation in places like the US and the EU. It's fair to say we are going to see more regulation. And this kind of thinking about how we'll use digital identity, and of course, Cardano already has a tall prism. It's way easier, based on what I know of Cardano and other blockchains right now. I think it's way easier right now for Cardano to already comply with these types of regulations than other blockchains. But we don't know where we're going to fall on this spectrum. We don't know at what point in the future we're going to figure out where jurisdictions like the US are going to fall on the spectrum. But I think it's fair to say we are going to have more regulation. We're going to be somewhere on a regulatory spectrum that requires more things than what has to be provided right now and probably forbids a lot of things that are going on right now. But I think the digital identity thinking going on in Cardano right now and the capabilities Cardano already has for things like Atala Prism are going to give us a huge leg up no matter where we end up on that spectrum. Hope you're having a great week, and I'll talk to you tomorrow.